Hi, I'm Marianne Hatzopoulou. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto in civil and mineral engineering. I do research on transportation emissions modeling and traffic-related air pollution. I'm also leading the transportation team within Canoe. All right, so here's our Canoe transportation team update. So just to start off, the objectives of our transportation team was initially to generate traffic volumes for selected Canadian cities and for multiple years. This was our primary objective. We realized that traffic volumes are very important for all sorts of epidemiological studies, for exposure assessment, and that a lot of colleagues find value in that. On top of this, we also generated emissions of greenhouse gases and air pollutants just from on-road vehicles based on road traffic and vehicle fleet information, again, for multiple years at different levels of resolution, and I'll cover all of that. And the third objective was to also generate volumes and emissions of medium and heavy duty trucks. And that has occurred in a smaller number of locations just because of the scarcity and the complexity of acquiring data on commercial vehicle movements. So our team members include Hassan Habib from Dell, and he was working on passenger vehicles and trucks in Halifax. So he has a model that includes both passenger transportation and freight, and we'll be looking at some of the outputs from that work. Darren Scott from McMaster, and Darren was also working on passenger vehicle volumes for selected cities using specific data from Census data. Matt Rorda, Eric Miller, and myself are from U of T, so we've covered the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, looking both at passenger vehicles, freight flows, as well as emissions from different modes. This is still a work in progress, and I don't want to mention right now the specific cities and all the years that we have. These are going to be updated in a table that will be, uploaded on the Canoe website to make sure that, we've got all the cities and the years and that this is consistent. So we've used different approaches to generate traffic volumes, and this is what I'll present today. I present a little bit on each one of these approaches. There's always trade-offs. Some of them are simpler and allow us to generate traffic volumes for multiple cities. Others are more complex, but they provide a richer information. So the first way of generating these traffic volumes is based on census data, and using census data, using the field journey to work, as well as traffic assignment models. I'll explain very briefly what traffic assignment models do. Second way of doing that is using actual travel survey information for metropolitan areas, as well as travel demand and traffic assignment models. So that gives us more of a 24-hour profile for vehicles on the road. And the third way is based on traffic count data and aerial images. So it's an entirely data-driven approach to generate these volumes. So starting off with estimates based on census data, the journey to work, and this was work that Darren at McMaster was leading, is, we recognize that the Canadian Census collects journey to work information every 5 years across the country. So there's here an opportunity to use the data to estimate traffic volumes only for the morning peak period, because this is a journey to work. But we can do this for multiple cities across Canada, and presumably morning peak period traffic volumes still are good correlates of a lot of health effects or air quality or emission information. The challenge, though, here that Darren has faced is that Statistics Canada has very strict rules on ensuring that workers cannot be identified based on their trip origin and destination, which means that there are a lot of trips that are underreported or not reported at all. And so therefore, he used an approach where he would extract the flows for all the trips that were not reported using something we call a gravity model in transportation. As you think about gravity, the gravity model is what it's pretty much doing is trying to allocate trips from origins to destinations by allocating more trips to destinations that are closer to the origin and a lot less to destinations that are further away. And this was then ran in a traffic assignment model called Transcat that will identify the paths that are used by these vehicles on the road network to eventually generate traffic volumes. This is a snapshot for 2016 journey to work traffic flows in Winnipeg. So this is for 7 to 8 a.m. And you'll see that, the roads in red are the roads that are congested. Everything in green is uncongested. Just was a snapshot. The orange dots are basically centroids of zones or neighborhoods where people live. So these are the places where trips are originating or destined to. So now moving on to estimates that are based on travel survey data and travel demand models. And very, very briefly, to give you an idea, travel surveys are usually for households, right? This covers passenger transportation. And what people do in travel surveys, so a lot of metropolitan areas have them. They collect the data every 5 years. And it's a snapshot of a typical day. So you call up somebody, or you do it online, obviously, or other methods, and you say, tell me everything that you've done yesterday. And so you generate these profiles of where people live, where they work, and all the different modes of transportation that they're using. So all of these trips can then be input within traffic assignment model. What a traffic assignment model does is once you provide the origin and the destination of a trip, it will identify the most likely path on the road network that these individuals are using. It's a combination, so some of them are using a shortest path assignment, but it's not like what you would do in GIS where you would allocate everyone on the shortest path, because clearly you're creating congestion, right? So the model is iterating. If it's put everyone on that same path, it's going to realize, oh, well, I created a lot of congestion, but there's another alternative path that's viable. And so it keeps on iterating until it reaches that kind of equilibrium. And based on that, we can then generate, traffic volumes and emissions. Important to say also that through travel survey data, we collect active transportation, right? And so therefore, as part of this effort, we do have these kilometers of active transportation from walking and biking, but at this stage, we're still using a shortest path approach. So assuming that cyclists are always using the shortest travel time or travel distance, which we know also there's a lot of research on route choice for pedestrians and cyclists, but at this stage that this is all we have. So giving you again some ideas of the results that were generated so far, this is work that Hassan Habib has done for Halifax. So he used that same approach that I've described, a travel demand model fed with travel survey data, and he used that to generate flows for passenger cars and passenger trucks. The one thing I didn't mention is for freight. The model, you can think about it exactly like you would think of a passenger model, but instead of having a home location, a work location, you have a logistics terminal and a distribution center and a final retailer. And so what you're doing is the model is distributing these goods across all the different, from consolidation centers, across different other centers, and maybe to the final shops and retailers. And so for Halifax, the model included both passenger cars and freight. And the model was also calibrated against traffic count data that was collected using traffic video footage, right? So the final traffic counts are really a reflection of what is seen on the road network. 24 hours of the day, so you can have traffic flows for every hour of the day, and the output link-based traffic flows include gasoline and diesel vehicles. The assumption here is that most vehicles are gasoline. We're not at this stage modeling electric vehicles on the road network. And then the emissions were estimated using emission factors from the MOVES model. So this is kind of a snapshot of traffic volumes generated for Halifax across the road network, for passenger cars, for delivery trucks. This gives you an idea of the different emissions across the day. So you can see, for example, passenger cars, greenhouse gas emissions, NOx will be the highest between 7 and 9 a.m., which makes sense. It's the peak period, the morning peak period. You'll see here the afternoon peak period, again, we see another peak. For passenger trucks, long haul trucks, you're gonna see that the peak is somehow in the midday, right? So it's not very early in the morning because they're not circulating with traffic. They're circulating around 11 to noon or 1 p.m. As well as, emissions by road segment. So these emissions can then be disaggregated across the different roads. For the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, we've used a very similar approach to the one described in Halifax, so I won't dwell on it. It's again starting with travel survey data. TTS stands for the Transportation Tomorrow Survey, which is travel survey data for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. It is then used in a travel demand model with traffic assignments, matching that with MOVE's emission factors, and then generating emissions for multiple modes. Again, once you do that, you're able to really spatially disaggregate emissions across the entire road network by time of day as well. So you can see here in the GTHA, in the AM peak period, we've got much higher emissions. This is for greenhouse gases than we would see in the midday because congestion levels are lower and the number of cars on the road are lower as well. Give you an idea of some of our latest data on the emission inventory for the GTHA. For 2016, we've estimated about 35,000 tons a day, and this number has been validated against various sources. This is it. It's very, very close to reality. That's the estimate I always quote, about 35,000 tons a day of CO2 equivalent, greenhouse gases in CO2 equivalent. Important to note that 76% of them are generated by cars and SUVs. Heavy trucks generate only 21% of them. There's not a lot of trucks and there's not a lot of kilometers that they're traveling compared to passenger cars. If you look at black carbon, you're going to see that 71% are actually generated by trucks. NOx is 52% generated by trucks. So trucks truly contribute disproportionately to air pollution compared to the mileage that they do on the road network. And finally, I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what we've been doing in terms of estimating emissions based on traffic count data. So this is what we call data-driven emission inventories, right? These examples, previous examples, present emission modeling approaches that rely on travel demand model with traffic data derived from travel surveys. But there's also an opportunity to use traffic counts to do exactly the same thing. And so I start here with the premise that generating an emission inventory, right, at a fine spatial scale, well, we need to actually know the spatial distribution of traffic. So you get that either using travel demand modeling or model or data from traffic counts. The issue with data of traffic counts is that you've got a city and you only have a certain number of count stations across the city. You don't count traffic on every single road, right? So there's a challenge here because traffic counts need to be interpolated in order to generate volumes on every single road segment. So you need to go from these few locations to covering the entire road network. There was an opportunity here. The City of Toronto manages an extensive traffic count program. And so there's an opportunity to really harness the depth and the breadth of the program to estimate traffic volumes across the entire road network. So to give you an idea of what a traffic count program looks like, most cities will have different tiers of stations to collect traffic data. You have what we call permanent stations. They're generally on highways, on major arterial roads. They're collecting data. Well, they've been collecting time series of data, I don't know, since 1980, since, very long time series of data, but there's a few, of them. But then you also have what we call short period traffic counts with automated recorders. And these would occur for maybe a few months in a year. And then the city sometimes changes their location across different roads to collect these snapshots, but a much shorter time frame. And then you've got something very small called turning movement counts, where sometimes these are really manual. There's a mall that wants to be built, a traffic impact statement needs to be developed. So somebody, a couple of workers are sent on the road and they manually collect counts. And these generally are done for 3 days in a row. But there's a lot of them, right? So how can we harness the value of these little snapshots over time to interpolate across the road network? And this gives you an idea of, relationships between stations. So a part of the work that we've done is to start establishing relationships. You've got a permanent station on this road. You have a station with a shorter record. You have a station with counts for a few days. How do they relate with each other, those different roads, so that we can start generating these interpolations? So eventually develop a data-driven model, we call it the traffic emission prediction scheme, that basically uses long-term traffic data And then we use here autoregressive moving average models to fill those time series and get this big historical average. Then we use these medium range databases and short-term traffic databases, and we use something called a pattern recognition approach, so that once we should see a very short-term traffic database, we go and look at the pattern of traffic there, and we find, well, which station actually that has more data resembles the most this short-term database, so that we can start pulling in some of that information from that higher tier station. The whole idea is to arrive at an annual average daily traffic. So not just an hourly or a daily, you want to make sure that the estimate really represents an annual average. And then we're using machine learning, support vector regression for certain local roads, because local roads really don't correlate with anything. You know, it doesn't matter how many residences you have or how the width of the roads or the number of lanes, they don't. So you actually need to get, you know, a machine learning model that uses a lot more information to do these predictions. And the ultimate prediction is the annual average daily traffic. Recently, what we've been doing is actually now harnessing the value of satellite data. So with Google aerial images, for example, you can take an image and you can count the number of vehicles in that image, which is good. We do that. But then that image is just a snapshot, right? What does it tell you about the yearly average at that location? So what we found was the best way to use these images and treat them exactly like we treat short-term traffic databases, exactly like we treat these manual counts that this person on the road has conducted for a few hours or maybe a few days, and use pattern recognition to identify how this image relates to higher tier stations, and then use those images everywhere where we want to do prediction, so that we're doing prediction on roads where now we're doing predictions on every road, at least using an image. You start with an image and you do a prediction for the annual average daily traffic. And with this, we've been able to generate, again, emissions and traffic for the city of Toronto. The value and the beauty of having these data-driven approaches, you can do it for as many years as you have count data. We started using count data for the city from 2006. There's older, certainly, and we want to include them. They're more challenging. 2006 is the first year where we feel very confident with the quality of the data. And you can clearly see here, just to show you emissions. Emissions have been decreasing, of course, because emission factors and vehicles have been getting better. It's too bad, I just realized now that I don't have one for traffic. We will see that traffic has been increasing. But obviously the advances in technology and fuel efficiencies have offset some of these increases in traffic. And I believe that is my last slide. So I'll end there. Thank you.